A new Illinois Policy Institute analysis finds 1/3 of Chicago public schools are only half full. Enrollment continues to fall at Chicago public schools. The Illinois Policy Institute says CPS has lost 16% of its students in the past decade. They say 1/3 of CPS schools are less than half full, and 5 schools are less than 10% full. Smaller classes and more funding are not leading to better results in kids' education. 2 years ago, only 21% of students in 3rd through 8th grade scored proficient in reading, and 16% scored proficient in math.
Joining us now to talk about this is Mailee Smith, Director of Labor Policy and Staff Attorney for the Illinois Policy Institute. Mailee, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for having me this morning.
Is it true? I mean, 1/3 of the schools are half empty. How do you sustain that much, the overhead of all of those buildings?
Right. It is truly stunning. And the 5 most empty of those schools are only at 10% capacity. And I think that is indicative, that 1/3 of schools being less than half full. It's indicative of 10 years of troublesome trends within Chicago public schools. We're seeing lower enrollment, lower test scores, lower than the state average, and yet higher costs per student than the state average, and higher taxes for the people. And, you talk about how do we sustain it? That's how it is. There's been higher funding. The people of Chicago are paying more to get less out of Chicago public schools.
Those students don't receive nearly as much money per student as students in Lake Forest or Winnetka. Is that fair?
Well, you can't really cherry pick districts because you could look at some of the other districts as well. For example, Glenview, District 25, and Arlington Heights, they're District 25, Glenview 24. They spend less per student and see more students meeting proficiency. In fact, Arlington Heights, District 25, they spend just over $21,000 per student compared to CPS's $29,000.
Yeah, but those are not kids that get shot at going to school. And some might argue that kids who live in areas of poverty need more money per student.
And it's the same thing, though, statewide. On average, the state spends less per student. But I think what you're talking about, though, is the instability that is definitely there within Chicago public schools. And you're right, that it's not necessarily something other students see in other suburbs or areas of the state. But I think the elephant in the room there then is the fact that Chicago Teachers Union over the last few years has created even more instability for students, walking out 3 times in the last 3 years. Students were out of school for 17 months. So there are a number of reasons why their proficiency levels may have dropped, and yet enrollment is dropping with funding ballooning. But I think we also have to look at that hold that the teachers union has over students' lives, and the fact that they've really been jerked around a lot in the last few years.
Let's talk about, it seems like if you wanted more money per child, it would seem like selling off some of these buildings would be a good way to do it. Is that not been addressed?
I'm not completely sure about that, but what I do know is that every time any school district, CPS, any other school district, makes those kind of changes, they have to be addressed with a teachers union. You can't close schools, you can't change the school days, you can't shift people around without there being some sort of negotiation. And we know that negotiations with Chicago Teachers Union never go well, frequently, especially in the last few years, end with students missing more school. And so it's hard to say that CPS should just be closing schools when there's all sorts of things going on that have to be negotiated before they could do that.
All right, for the full report, you can go to the illinoispolicy.org. Mailee, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.